Well, first of all, the change of the attitude from the West is based on the change of value of the politics in Myanmar. Say they highly appreciate Suu Kyi's value and political institutions, so they change their attitudes. But the problem is the reality remain unchanged. The conflicts, the contradictions, the inequalities among the ethnic groups, everything remain unchanged. So I'm afraid at this moment, the West appreciate Suu Kyi's regime and appreciate Suu Kyi's efforts, but if take actions to address the real problems beyond the value framework, I'm afraid that the honeymoon between Suu Kyi's government and the West will be terminated.
Well, we all understand very well that State Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi from Myanmar has been making the simmering unrest in Myanmar's border region as a governmental priority since she took office, and yet there are a lot of realities. Clashes of this sort continue. As we mentioned, in September, fights broke out between the military and rebels in the southern Kayin state and the northern half of Rakhine state, and it's currently under a military lockdown after a string of deadly attacks on border posts last month. So to the police officers over there, the latest clashes in Shan state are yet another blow to Suu Kyi's hopes of forging a nationwide peace agreement. Mr. Lim, that question is ever approaching to Ms. Suu Kyi. That is, how will she face the realities? Will she also incorporate some of the measures that she accused the earlier administration of doing in terms of handling the current crisis? That would, of course, be a question mark. And secondly, how would she answer the so-called accusations or questions coming from some members of the international community? Mr. Lim.
She has a very difficult job, and she's trying to manage the job. It's a very complex problem because these problems have been around even before she took power. So it is not realistic for us or for anyone to expect Ms. Aung San Suu Kyi to completely resolve them within a very short time. Having said that, her government was making some headways in the peace process in the Wa state before the current round of conflict. So if she's able to persist with some of these peacemaking gestures, and more importantly, if she's able to strike a consensus with the other political factions within her, and also within the political environment of Myanmar's political scene, then there might be a possibility for the peace process to go forward.
Right.
And it has to occur in stages. There has to be first de-escalation, and after de-escalation, a ice-breaking session, before they can actually talk about the main terms of a peace process.
Right.
And these require a lot of time, a lot of political will, and a lot of political consensus. And the international community, including China, can come in and help out with the process, as well as Myanmar's ASEAN counterparts.
Right. At this moment, Mr. Yang, we understand there were earlier a peace talk, if we could use that phrase, between the government and also some of the minorities of the country. 17 out of the 20 already participated in the meeting, and yet some have not. And those some have recently been heating up their campaigns against the government forces. But even about that peace talk, it is in the nature of these minority groups trying to seek more autonomy with political consent from the government. And yet, as you may know, a country could only give certain degrees of autonomy to the minority groups of a country. So this is a very interesting tug of war, if we could use that phrase once again, between the government and these minority groups. Mr. Yang.
Well, I think the situation and the issue of Myanmar that you mentioned that we discussing are very unique. In total, there are 135 ethnic groups, and only one of the 100 plus occupy over 60% of the population. So in fact, the equality issue has been a decades-long problem for this country. So basically, I think the failure of the previous peace talks lies in the lack of the full equalities among all the groups. So for solving this problem or contradiction or dilemma, I think the authority who commands the advantages over all the parties or groups should lower further the threshold, should give a greater common grounds, should make a greater compromise so that the process can be more inclusive, including all the groups.
Mr. Lim, is that possible? I mean, you can see, well, Mr. Yang explained the realities on the ground in Myanmar. That is the differences of the level of expectations among different groups and between these groups and also the government. That is very hard to readjust the expectations, as you may know, Mr. Lim.
There are long-standing political problems, but at the core of the political problems, there are also economic ones. And what are the economic issues that involve? The economic issues that involve include apportionment of resources, who owns which part of the forest, who owns which part of the gemstone mines, how do they equitably distribute the wealth from the natural resources, and also apportionment of territorial boundaries, all the economic problems. And it may be possible to focus on economic problems first, resolve some of the bread and butter issues on resource allocation, and also economic development. Again, that's where the international community can come in, or the One Belt One Road from China, or the AIIB from China, or the ASEAN cooperative partners. They can come in to help with economic development parts of the issue. So if they can start off with the resource issue, the apportionment of natural resources, and also economic development, perhaps there can be a functional solution that can be sort of the early stages in an early solution to the more complex political issues.
And Mr. Lim, AIIB is not China's, but rather an organization that incorporates many founding members, their consensus. But by the way, let me come back to you, Mr. Yang. Will Mr. Lim's suggestion about these different kinds of organization mechanism coming together, how much will that really address the root problems? After all, it is still Myanmar's own issue. They have to come up with their own consensus. Is political, economic issues chicken and egg thing? Are we seeing a ever worse?
Yeah, I really agree with Mr. Lin's idea. Actually, you are right. Say all the mixed groups sitting at the table plus some outsiders have a question of chicken and eggs. Who should go first? But the difficult answer lies in the economic cooperation, economic development. Now, by facing so many dilemmas, the common exit lies in the economical one. So we should focus on the economic cooperation, meanwhile continue to address the political differences so that we can have a solution.
Before we go, final words from both of you, very briefly if you can. We see the root cause, we see the political crisis, and we also see an immediate border crisis going on right now. What to do? Very briefly sum up, Mr. Lim, one sentence.
Okay, three things very important. Number one, pragmatism. Go for economic development and cooperation. Number two, have a very broad consensus amongst the political faction. And number three, compromises.
I see. Mr. Yang.
For China, first of all, ceasefire unconditionally right now. Secondly, quick arrangement for the refugees and measures preventing more refugees flooding in both Bangladesh and China.
All right. A lot to be done, but thank you so much for both of you for putting forward your suggestions and your insights. Yang Xiyu, Lin Tan Wai, really appreciate gentlemen for being with us. A crisis going on at the border. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on our program.